hope that too. And thanks for joining us for now and relay them and sharing your perspective. And viewers, let's move on to news on the Ukraine war. Now, Ukraine is saying that its negotiating team will meet U.S. officials soon with Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, stating that Kyiv will focus on specific steps in peace proposals. He said Ukraine expects concrete results that could help advance towards a ceasefire. The announcement came as Sybiha spoke alongside Latvia's Foreign Minister Baiba Braze, who said Latvia supports U.S. efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine. This follows comments from a senior Russian diplomat who said Moscow would not make significant concessions on a peace plan. Those remarks came a day after a leaked recording showed a U.S. envoy discussing how Moscow might present its position to President Trump. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said earlier in the week that he is ready to advance the U.S.-backed framework to end the war and to discuss outstanding issues directly with the U.S. president. He said any talks should also include European allies. This is what Ukrainian Foreign Minister had said. Listen in.
Очікувати зустрічі переговорних команд. Які наші очікування? Очікування – конкретні результати. Конкретні результати для того, щоб відбувався прогрес. Для нас надзвичайно важливо, і Україна неодноразово це демонструвала, досягнення перемир'я. Так, українська сторона зацікавлена у контактах на найвищому рівні, у зустрічі президент Зеленський, президент Трамп, тому що є питання, найбільш чутливі питання, які можуть бути обговорені лише на рівні лідерів.
All right, and let's now welcome Dan Perry, who is a world affairs expert, into the discussion here. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Perry. I just want to ask you now, Kyiv is expecting concrete steps with this meeting with the U.S. official in the coming week. Do you think much progress can be made after this round of discussion? Given also that Witkoff is also due to meet the Russian officials in Moscow?
I am skeptical, as I think are most observers, but anything is possible, as has been the case for the past 4 years. It depends on, ultimately, Vladimir Putin and whether he's willing to end the war. The latest, quite disgraceful events suggest otherwise. What we've seen in the past week has been compared to the Munich Agreement that basically forced Czechoslovakia in 1938 to give up part of its territory under the notion that if you appease an aggressive dictator, maybe he will thereafter go away, sufficing with his pound of flesh. The 28-point plan that was presented, that became public last week, essentially is emerging as a plan written by the Russians and passed on as an American-Russian plan that would amount to America joining Russia in its effort to weaken Ukraine. I don't see any way that Ukraine and, for that matter, the Europeans can accept a situation where Ukraine not only gives up 20% of its territory, including land Russia hasn't yet occupied in Donetsk and Luhansk, while limiting its armed forces, agreeing that it had conducted a Nazi regime implicitly, and the ban on Nazism that appears there absurdly, agrees to hold elections in 100 days, I believe, suggesting Zelensky is somehow illegitimate when there is no parallel demand of Putin, a complete and total dictator, and really is left without real security guarantees if you are carefully reading those 28 points. It was a non-starter, but of course, given Trump's love of flattery and his absence of an internal dialectic, the way they've chosen to handle it is to speak less clearly than I just did, and to pretend like it's a reasonable basis and to be very polite in their rejection of it. But reject it they have, as did really Zelensky, again, despite great politeness and measured phrasing. And now we see something of a correction with the U.S. Agreeing to talk to Ukraine. So no longer going over the heads of Ukraine and the Europeans and now talking to them. Is Is it possible that a plan that Ukraine can agree to would be agreed to by Putin as well? Maybe, but I don't know anyone who thinks it likely. So I think what we're looking at potentially is a continuation of the war. And if America walks away from it, and decides to no longer give Ukraine intelligence and to no longer even be willing to sell weaponry to NATO that is earmarked for Ukraine, that would be a problem, but it may not be fatal because the Europeans in all these areas are rapidly trying to close the gap to make America less indispensable. And that attaches to a bigger issue, which is the unraveling of the transatlantic alliance that has brought peace and prosperity to much of the globe. It's a real tragedy, and that is a function of Trump's disdain for everything that preceded him, including not only multilateral institutions that furthered global governance and responsibility, but also, of course, much of the existing establishment in the United States.
All right, thanks. That was a very detailed response from you, Dan Perry, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. But I also request you to stay on. We want to now tell you, viewers, that the United States has directed its diplomats to lobby foreign governments against policies that support mass migration. This instruction was issued through a State Department cable sent last week to dozens of US embassies across Europe, Canada, and Australia. The cable reportedly states that the administration views crime and human rights abuses linked to large migrant populations and individuals of migration background as a significant concern for many countries. It further says that these issues have the potential to affect public safety and social cohesion across the West. Now, under the new directive, US missions have been told to report back to Washington on incidents of crime and rights violations linked to migrants and to analyze how host governments are responding. They have also been asked to press these governments to reform migration policies and scale back programs that enable mass migration. This latest move comes as part of a broader anti-immigration agenda that has been central to President Donald Trump's political platform. Since taking office, he has expanded enforcement operations, deployed troops to the southern border, and has even pledged to deport large numbers of immigrants living in the United States without legal status. Dan, I would request you to join back on this development. Now, of course, Trump is standing true to his Make America Great Again principle and policies, and in fact also sticking to what he had promised. What kind of response should we expect from the countries that have received the cable?
Well, they have understood that Trump works well with flattery and acquiescence, verbal acquiescence at least, if not in action indeed. I think they're going to politely tell him to mind his own business while appearing to, not be too strident about it. Of course, this is a cable to U.S. Representations around the world to report on how countries are handling migration and to basically amplify any cases they find of migrants committing crimes and making trouble for these countries, to build the narrative that migration is bad. Look, it is very ironic that this attempt to quash migration internationally is being carried out by the U.S., a country almost entirely built on migration, a country that speaks English, and a little bit Spanish because of migration. It's almost comically hypocritical and absurd. On the other hand, Trump's crackdown on illegal migration coming from the South is one of his few policies in the U.S. that's popular, I think. Maybe not the brutality of ICE and some of the more outrageous aspects of it, but the idea that one should police one's border and that a Western country has no particular obligation to let in the rest of the world is indeed popular. This is a case where I think all sides are being a little bit economical with the truth, shall we say. The anti-migration forces around the world exaggerate the degree to which migrants commit crimes and underestimate the degree to which they help the economy in many cases. The reason Europe originally had massive migration after World War II is because of labor shortages in Germany and other places. But on the other hand, the so-called progressive forces around the world that seem to be acting as if any attempt to limit the inflow of migrants from the developing world is necessarily racism, that's a lot of nonsense also. I mean, it is quite possible that in many countries, people want to maintain their culture and are willing to pay a price, an economic price, for keeping out migrants in significant numbers, in particular in Europe, where we're really, to a great degree, talking about Muslim migration. And a lot of these communities are illiberal by nature, and Europe wants to maintain its liberal society. And it's confronted with with a rather amusing paradox. Can you be liberal with illiberalism? Is it liberal to demand that people coming in with extremely conservative religious views that are in some ways antithetical to European views convert or assimilate? That doesn't sound so liberal. No one really knows what to do about all this. But without a doubt, this American cable so brazenly interfering in other countries' business, essentially it's another case of a dog whistle towards Trump's nativist base, just to let them know that he continues to be opposed to immigration and in general continues to be loyal to this nativist, inward-looking, hyper-conservative worldview.
All right, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks, Dan, for joining us here at NewsX World. And viewers, let's now move on to some news from Mexico, where Mexican authorities are investigating the president of the Miss Universe organization over alleged drug and arms trafficking, as well as fuel theft. The Attorney General's office says 13 arrest warrants have been issued as part of the case, but has not named any suspects. Local media report that one of the warrants targets Miss Universe president Raul Rocha, who owns half of the organization. Officials refer to him only as Raul R, following Mexican legal practice, and say details about his status will be released later. Neither Rocha nor organization has responded to requests for comment. Now, the probe, which dates back to 2024, emerges just days after Mexican contestant Fatima Bosch won the Miss Universe title in Thailand. Earlier in the competition, she led a walkout following a dispute with the pageant director and later received support from the president, Claudia Sheinbaum. Rocha acquired his 50% stake in Miss Universe in 2024 through Legacy Holding Group USA. And that's a wrap on America 360.